Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast, presented by Exo Mountain Gear. This podcast and the gear that we produce at Exo Mountain Gear share the same purpose: to make you a more capable, confident, and successful backcountry hunter. Straight to the point, no fluff, and no BS. This show is all about providing you with valuable information from experienced hunters. To learn more about the podcast or about our backcountry hunting packs, please visit exomountaingear.com. The topic tonight is bears and bear hunting. It's a great time to record this episode as we head into the spring season, where many of you will have an opportunity to get after some Bruins. Our guest is Douglas Bose. He is the author of a couple books on black bear hunting, including The Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting, as well as No Bait, Just Bears, Black Bear Hunting Tactics. We actually recorded this episode with Doug way back in August, and didn't get around to publishing it for the fall bear season. So I figured, hey, here we are with the spring season, it's a great time to dive back into this topic. So we discussed with Doug what are some of the differences between hunting bears in the fall and hunting them in the spring. We talk about scouting, habitat, we get into spot and stalk tactics, calling, aftershock care, and so much more. So if you have any interest in black bear hunting at all, this is going to be a great primer for you, and we even dive into some more advanced topics. Before we dive into the show, I want to thank Tyler in Oklahoma for leaving us an iTunes review. Listeners, we always appreciate these reviews, and we want to reward you guys who do that by randomly drawing a review to give you guys some Exo Mountain Gear and Hunt Backcountry podcast swag. Tyler, go ahead and contact us to podcast@exomountaingear.com. We will get you set up with that. Listeners, if you can leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else you might be listening to this, you'll be entered automatically. As always, you can contact us directly with any questions, comments, or feedback to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Finally, wanted to remind you guys about the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Rendezvous that is coming to Boise, Idaho in April. We would love to see you guys there. If you want to learn more about that, be sure to go to backcountryhunters.org and check out the great weekend that is the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Rendezvous. Hope to see you there. Okay, well, let's dive into this show with Douglas Bose. Doug, welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. How you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. Steve, you're on the line as well, man. How's it going, bud?
I'm good, man. Every day we get a little and closer to me leaving for Alaska, and then hunting season's in full swing. So
yeah,
the anticipation, the nervousness, I guess, still got a lot of things to do and get figured out. I decided to somehow my rest got all jacked up, so I put a new rest on my bow today. Got 5 days before Alaska to get it figured out. So,
well, the good thing is you have nothing to do in the next 5 days between the bow. So that's the pro.
At least you're not cutting it close.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm used to it at this point, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. When do things kick off up there for you, Doug?
Well, bear season's in full swing. It started August 1st on the west side of western Washington. And then September, we got elk, and then deer in October. So it's gearing right up.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Doug, for listeners who aren't familiar, let's start with some background, some history on yourself. If you want to talk about maybe some of the personal history, hunting history, get into how you got so involved with bear hunting, which led to writing some books and things like that. I'd love to hear a little bit of your story.
Sure. Well, I grew up in western Washington, kind of out in the country, and I've been hunting since I was probably 12, once I passed my hunter's education. And then I mainly hunted deer and elk as a kid, some coyotes. And then as time progressed, my older brother David actually kind of got me into bear hunting. And like a lot of people, I actually just stumbled on a bear while I was deer hunting, and that was the first bear I had killed. But of course, the bear was sitting down and picking up something off the ground, and I thought, well, what's it doing over there? And when I shot it and I ended up going over to it, it was sitting on its butt eating maggots off of a cougar kill, picking them up with their claws. And so that was a smelly drag out. But anyway, so it was accidental. But as I got more and more into it, and reading online and watching videos and stuff, it just really became an obsession to hunt something that can hunt you. And not that they're something to be feared, but they're to be respected. And it was just something that kind of took over my hunting desire. And then my older brother, David, like I say, kind of helped me out on some good spots and this and that. And then I kind of branched out on my own. And a couple of years later, I've been seeing a lot of stuff on the forums about, hey, I know how to bait for bears, but I don't know how to hunt them spot and stock or calling, that type of thing. And in Washington State, since about the mid-'90s, you can't use dogs or bait for bear. And so the only thing I knew was how to hunt them with spot and stock or calling, that type of technique, not being able to bait. And so I thought, well, I'm going to self-publish a book, which was called No Bait, Just Bears, and that just talks about spot and stock and calling without the use of bait. So from there, I ended up getting picked up by a publisher who asked me to write The Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting, which is all of the first book, and then talks about baiting and recipes and what to do after the kill and how to skin and all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's excellent, man. We threw some questions out there on social media that our audience might want to hear about bear hunting, and many of those questions were to do exactly what you just said and talk about stalking tactics, to talk about glassing techniques, to talk about calling and all that. So I'm sure that we'll dive deep into it. I guess something to kick us off and get us started is obviously there's bear hunting opportunities clearly in different areas of the country, but there's also different times that different areas have seasons in swing. And so as you kind of mentioned right now, things are going for Washington. Some states, bear hunting's bigger out in the spring. What are some of the biggest differences you see in terms of strategies for hunting bears now and into the fall versus hunting bears in the spring?
So the number one thing I want your listeners to get out of this entire podcast is, if you're going to hunt bears without the use of bait, you just need to find the food source for that time of year and focus on that with a lack of people around. And in my opinion, you'll find bear. Now, it depends on the type of season, the terrain, and so forth about what they're eating. But so, for example, back to your question, in Western Washington in the spring, they are stripping evergreen trees for the cambium layer, which is like a sugary sap that comes up to the tree, or through the tree, that it sits down there in the winter. When it starts heating up, it goes up through the tree. The bears strip it, end up eating that sugary sap, and it ends up killing the tree. And so in Western Washington, we have a spring bear draw that it's a special permit you have to put in for, but it helps to kind of alleviate the pressure of the bears on these trees, and they'll wipe out large sections of trees, no problem. And so as the general season comes around, the fall season, berries become ripe, apples and things like that. So you really just need to focus on what the bears in your area are eating. Back east, it might be acorns or a farmer's field with corn, that type of stuff. But you really just need to focus and study their scat. That'll tell you kind of, hey, what they're eating at that time of year. If you don't know what they're eating, you can go online and kind of look it up through your local hunting forums, or you can speak to like a game biologist who could probably help you out with that too.
How much variance is there, not only regionally, but you mentioned specifically in Western Washington with these trees, even hopping over to the eastern side of the state or some other different kind of areas where there's bear populations? Does it really vary? Jumping from spot to spot, even within a state, that what their food sources might be? Yeah,
so Washington is separated by the North Cascades and a couple other mountain ranges. And on the western side of the state, it's evergreen. There's trees everywhere, rolling hills, lots of water. And then you go to eastern Washington, and it's kind of like a desert. So the vegetation varies greatly. Over here in the spring, they're eating, fresh shoots of grass, skunk cabbage, stripping the trees, that type of thing. Over there in eastern Washington in the spring, again, they're eating fresh shoots, grasses, anything green. And then when the fawns and calves start dropping, they'll be hitting those, trying to, eat them as best they can. But it does vary. But the strategy remains the same. The strategy of finding food, because that's the bear's main focus, except during the rut, is just finding food, getting calories. If you can focus on areas that you know that are getting hit by bears in the evenings or mornings, to me that's when they're most active, and really just focus on that, you'll find success.
You mentioned morning and evening, which is obviously true of most animals in terms of activity, or at least visible activity, being on their feet. What does a bear do midday, and are there midday hunting opportunities? How do your strategies change for that, or do you simply focus on mornings and evenings?
Usually when I'm bear hunting, it's kind of, hey, I've got a couple hours to get away from work, or family time's opened up to where it allows me to go hunting. So usually that's in the morning or in the evenings. You can be successful during the day. I have seen plenty of bears in mid-afternoon. I kind of look at it like, especially in August, when we first start, it's 90 degrees out. It's hot. The bears are active, looking for food and whatnot, but it's usually they're in the shade, they're under cover. So that's why I usually hunt mornings and evenings too. It's a bit cooler. You can kind of pinpoint them a little bit easier. So another thing I like to tell people is, of course you don't want to do it when you're out in the woods, but if you have a bear pelt, throw it on your back and then walk around your yard for a second and see how nice and cool that is. It's extremely hot. And so you can kind of put yourself in the mindset of the bear that says, hey, I want to stay cool, but I still want to look for calories. And that's another key point, too. If you're hunting during the summer months, August and early September, they're going to be in those cool draws, those creek beds, swampy areas, that type of stuff to stay cool, but still have food to eat and cover.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I guess before we get into additional in the field tactics on the hunting side specifically, besides trying to locate and identify food sources, what other strategies do you have pre-season or pre-hunt in terms of scouting, or in terms of narrowing the area of focus that you're going to be hunting?
Sometimes I'll keep a journal, which will help me kind of throughout the years. So, for example, if an area just gets clear-cutted in the fall or something like that, it's no good for hunting right now. But in 3 to 4 years, it's going to be great for hunting because all that underbrush starts to grow up. There's berries everywhere. There's more cover. So I'll keep a journal of that, and then as time progresses, I can look back and say, oh yeah, that clear cut down the road, I should go check that out and see what's happening. So that's one example. The other type of pre-hunting scout, I suppose you could say, is using Google Earth is a magnificent tool. I think a lot of people already kind of know about it, but I don't think it's utilized as well as it could be. You can look, on Google Earth, the different histories of, you can go back 10 years or however, and see if things have been logged or how things have progressed or been developed from housing, that type of stuff. So it really kind of saves you the leg room, not the leg room, the leg work of running around and driving, especially saving gas a little bit using Google Earth. And the other thing too is, so when I'm deer hunting, that's later in the season. Bears are a little more hard to find. They're kind of scattered at that time. The berries are kind of gone, so they're more looking for opportunities of maybe fawns or something to that effect. But as I'm going around, so for example, last year there was a great spot. I was deer hunting. There was a log landing that had about 40-some piles of bear poop on it, but it was about a month old. But I wrote that down in my journal where it was and stuff like that. And I could head back there, say I went there in October, I could head back there in September of the following year, and more than likely there's going to be bear in that area. So that's another good thing. It's just looking for old scat or old bear sign, even though it might be old. If you can decipher kind of how old it was, you can go back the following year and maybe find success that way as well.
So we've established targeting food. You mentioned kind of cool things such as creek draws and other areas that provide both water as well as cooler temperatures. Any other sort of terrain or topographical features that you look at? Do bears use things like saddles in terms of travel corridors or anything like that?
I think bears use the path of least resistance lots of times. So they'll use logging roads, hikers' trails, as long as, there's not a ton of people on them, that type of thing. Now, I know that around here, it can be very, very thick. So it's kind of difficult to spot and stalk in certain places. But if you use the terrain to your advantage, so for example, if you go in there kind of early season or before season starts in the spring, and you can take some clippers and clip yourself a path, bears, other animals will start to use that path because it's least resistance. So if you can kind of get into the brush, make a path to a berry patch or something like that, keep it kind of clear. No one else knows about it. You know about it. The bears will find it, and they'll start working that area. I've seen bears use saddles. I've seen them use, the typical shoots where bucks, shoot down, that type of thing. But the thing with bears is I don't think they really care. They can travel through walls of blackberries like it's nothing. And that's another thing that's amazed me about bears, is they can either be really loud and comfortable, or, they can melt into the ground when they feel threatened and not move a leaf in an entire wall of blackberries. Like, it's just incredible how they do that.
This might, just tie into where the food's hot, but I'm curious, in the areas that you have most experience hunting, are there any generalities that stick out to you in terms of certain elevations? And obviously that's going to vary on the country, but where you're at in Western Washington, do you find that they're, most active or most present at certain types of elevations?
It depends on the time of season. So in the spring, when they come out of their dens, things start to green up kind of down low, and you want to, stay on the south-facing slopes, areas that are getting a lot of sun. And then as the season progresses, the blackberries and the low-lying blackberries and thimbleberries, huckleberries, they start to ripen kind of down low, lower to sea level. But as things progress, and the summer wears on, the fall starts to wear on, that berry ripening kind of raises in elevation. And I think the bears kind of follow that. So like currently at about 1,500 feet to 2,500 feet, in my area, the blackberries are ripe. I've got plums all over the place. So there's plenty of food in this area. And I think that people should concentrate where the berries or the acorns, whatever might be ripening at that time, and adjust their elevation, adjust their hunting as the season progresses, to follow the bears, to follow the food. You wouldn't want to hunt necessarily in November down low, unless snow provided, but you want to just kind of bounce around with the bears. Bears don't always stay at a constant elevation. Just follow that food.
Do you use game camera strategies at all in terms of scouting or kind of monitoring areas?
I have. I've used a couple of game cams. I gave it to my brother, actually. He's given me a couple things, so we just kind of traded. But I have used them. I've noticed that bears tend to enjoy the cameras about as much as I do. A lot of my pictures are bears licking the camera, or I've got like claw marks across my camera. Mm-hmm. I've had one bear grab the camera and break the cable that it was attached to and just kind of snap it off the tree. So yeah, but I really don't use cameras all that often anymore. My fear in Washington, Western Washington specifically, we kind of have a problem with thieving of trail cameras. And so I don't really want to spend $130 or more and then have it ripped off, just because somebody wanted to be a jerk and steal it. So.
Yeah. Let's transition. So we've talked some about hopefully helping us identify areas where the bears might be at a certain time, and a bit about their behavior and focus. Let's really zone in on the hunt specifically. So unlike hunting a bait site, I mean, you know what you're doing, right? You're going in, you're sitting on that bait site, you're waiting simply in ambush. Let's get into what you're doing without bait you know a rough area, you know, say a rough elevation. How is this hunt playing out for you? Do you like to use glass? I know you mentioned spot and stalk. Are you setting up along game trails? Are you trying to make an ambush? Trying to make a move? Kind of walk us through the most effective strategies for you, and really from the beginning of the hunt, your approach, and then how you move through that.
The beginning of the hunt, I usually have an area kind of in mind, or at least a terrain in mind. It could be a completely new area, but I'm looking for a specific type of terrain. I'm looking for brushy gullies, or I'm looking for a large berry patch, blueberry field, real tall, nasty, brushy areas where maybe no one hunts, and tree lines, edges. Specifically as well, you want to be able to have a shooting lane. Over here, it gets so thick sometimes that can be one of your biggest problems, is finding an adequate shooting lane. So as I'm going into the area, and say I find some areas that has food in it, I'd be looking for sign of bear. I'd be looking for scat or prints, that type of stuff. If I happen not to find any, what I will do is, if I still like the area, is I'll get up on somewhere kind of tall, like a log jam or maybe a log landing, any sort of rock outcropping, something that allows me to see down into the brush or the gully, gives me some sort of vantage point. And I will sit and listen, because lots of times you will hear bears long before you ever see them. I don't know how many times I've heard bears well before I saw them. A prime example of that was opening weekend, August 1st over here. But we can get into that a little later. So, and then I will glass. Most of the time, when I'm glassing for bears, I will use binoculars. The reason being is that in Western Washington, it's fairly close. I mean, you can glass over across the canyon, but the odds of me traveling a mile and a half, 2 miles for a bear, unless it's something amazing, is pretty slim. But most of the time, most of the terrain I'm in, I can see 400 or 500 yards at best. And so it just benefits me to carry around the binoculars. Now, last year I was up goat hunting with my dad and family, and we had spotter scopes for goats, and we were spotting bear up in these large blueberry fields and whatnot, and we ended up taking a bear. My brother did. But you need to tailor your optics for the terrain and what you're doing. If it's going to be foggy out, you don't need to necessarily bring your spotter, especially if you're just going for a day hunt. But I always just carry the binos with me. And while I'm spotting, a little trick I have is if I spot something black that I suspect to be a bear, I usually count until 10. If it doesn't move, half the time it's not a bear. Bears seem to be always on the move, whether they're walking or just grazing, grabbing stuff. Now, that's not to say that you should assume that something black and it moves, hey, that's a bear, I'm going to shoot it. But you want to be sure of your target, obviously. But that's a tip. Bears are almost always on the move, unless they're asleep. And I
like that
too many
tip.
sleeping bears.
I've
and it
lost
works.
many a bear. Yeah.
It's worked for me. I don't know how many times. So from there, if I do see a bear, and it's in some nasty, cruddy area that I don't think I can stalk up to, that kind of brings me to predator calling. I'll bring the bear to me. Predator calling doesn't necessarily work all that great in August when there's tons of food everywhere, but it never hurts to try. You're really just trying to pique the bear's interest, so it will come toward you. I've had bears come running in, to a predator call, and then they stop all of a sudden, and there's a huge huckleberry bush next to it, and then, they got food, so why bother carrying to me? They just sit there and eat the huckleberries instead. So they usually teach me something when I'm calling. That's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, awesome. What were you going to say there on the bears moving, Steve?
Oh, nothing. Yeah, I'm just it was just cracking me up because I'm just just in my mind, I've stared at so many freaking black log stumps for like 30 minutes, through the binos, like just watching it to move. I think that 10-second rule is probably a good one to follow. I like it.
It is so
and
true.
It's subjective. I mean, sometimes it's 15 seconds, but yeah.
No, I get you. Like, I specifically like this. I remember a bear hunt just this spring. I remember just there was a log and I didn't bring my spine scope that day, and it was it was across the canyon, and I just stared at that thing forever, just like kept coming back to it, I'd glass and come back to it, and it never moved, but it just looked so much like a bear that I was convinced, and then sure enough it wasn't. But yeah, it just kind of cracked me up when you said that.
Oh, and one thing I want to chime in real quick too, because you were talking from like beginning to end of the hunt. Sometimes people they'll hunt till dark, and I've got nothing against people who hunt until dark and stuff like that. But I want to encourage people to think in their head that hey, if you take a shot, are you going to be able to find blood? Are you going to be able to ensure that you killed the bear or are able to track it, stuff like that? Over here, it can be still kind of dusk and light in a clear cut, but then you step into the woods and it's almost pitch black. So just, consider your whereabouts and your own physical abilities and stuff like that when hunting bear. So don't just sling lead at it or an arrow, You want to be ready to put in the work to find the bears. Most of the time, if a bear gets hit, it's going to go to the nastiest, crappiest spot on the planet, and you need to crawl in after it. So it can be a lot of fun that way.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. What tips do you have for moving in this thick country? So you get a bear spotted, or maybe you hear a bear, you want to go make a play, you want to check things out, but as you mentioned, they're often in thick country, brushy country, in these berry thickets. How are you making an approach, or do you try and just be patient, anticipate where the bear might make an exit? How do you evaluate those scenarios once you have something spotted?
If predator calling is kind of a card I've already dealt, then usually that's my first option. Like if I see a bear and I'm interested in it, I'm going to predator call to see if that thing will come to me, because it's easier for the bear to come to me than it is for me to move quietly through that stuff and angle a shot. If that's not really possible, what I will do is I'll have a cow call and work my way toward the bear. Always watch your wind, though. You can fool a bear's eyes. You're never going to fool its nose. And once it sniffs you, you might as well pack up. So watch your wind. But I use a cow call. So anytime I make some sort of rustling in the brush or crashing around, I'll mew and hopefully kind of ease the bear's wariness of what might be coming in. In fact, I've put a stalk on a bear before, and I've been using that cow call, and the thing came right into me. And granted, I wasn't predator calling. I was using it to kind of cover my sound, but that's a good trick. And it doesn't have to be perfect, so don't get down on yourself if you don't sound just like a cow or whatever it might be that you're trying to imitate. But I'll use that.
When you're predator calling, can you walk through that sequence? It's something that we've slightly dabbled in, but just never had any success at all. How long?
Oh, hold on now. You might have had success. This is key. You might have had success. You just didn't know it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of times where I've predator called and I thought, man, nothing came in. It's horrible. And then I'll bring somebody along with me, and if they weren't there, I would have never known that anything had come in. So one example is I was predator calling with my brother, and I had a bear 15 yards behind me on this snowy valley that we were in. Had no idea it was even there. And the bear ended up leaving because it spotted my brother, and then another bear came down, and he ended up shooting that one behind me as well. And both bears, I had no idea were even there. So you might have had success, you just didn't know it.
Okay.
As far as predator calling goes, I like to just find bearish looking territory. I mean, if you're fishing, for example, I compare predator calling to fishing lots of times. So if you're bass fishing, you wouldn't just cast, a floating frog in the middle of a calm lake, right in the center where it's 80 feet deep. But you might do that over, a log that's kind of offshore. With bear, it's kind of the same idea. You want to find a spot that looks like that holds a bear. Maybe you've spotted some scat. Maybe you've seen on the hiker's forum that they've spotted bear in there. And set yourself up against a tree. Try to get some elevation if you can. Even if you have a tree stand set up for deer, maybe a permanent one or just a climber, you can use that as well to get you above ground. And then you want to have the wind to your back. So you want to be able to see downwind of you. Bears, like coyotes, will try to circle you and smell you. Not every time, but lots of times. So you want to have that as your best shooting lane. And then you basically want to call. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't think that you sound horrible. I'm sure that I sound god-awful. But it works. Think of, when you're predator calling, think of playing with a kitten. And you have a string, and you're moving the string, and the cat's interested. But then you quit moving it, and the cat's no longer interested. And then you start moving it again, and then the cat starts playing again. It's the same thing with bear. When you're predator calling, I don't know how many times I've seen this. If you're squealing on the call, the bear will come walking in, sneaking in, running in. But then when you stop, the bear stops. And then you start blowing again, and the bear starts coming again. So you got to think in your head, hey, I'm calling, 700 yards down this valley, and how long is it going to take for a bear to walk or run to me? You want to give it like an hour. I usually call for an hour and wait another 10, 15 minutes. After that, just being quiet to see if a bear will sneak in. Sometimes smaller bears, they won't want to come in to maybe something that's getting beat up. They want to wait to see kind of what's going on with it first. So if you're quiet and you sit there and wait after an hour of calling, lots of times you'll spot a bear. In fact, a reader of my book just had that happen a couple of days ago. He messaged me and said, hey, first time calling, we called for an hour, gave up, sat there for 20 minutes, and a bear showed up, and he stuck it with an arrow at like 35 yards. So that's a prime example.
Awesome. I guess in my head, when we've tried it, it's been 4 or 5 years ago probably, we had actually glassed up bears, and they were, across the canyon, a small ravine or something like that, 400 yards away, feeding. And we tried, and they didn't even lift up their head to look at us. And makes sense if what you said earlier, if they're sitting there feeding, that they're like they really could give a rat's ass about you.
Yeah, and I mean that's happened numerous times. Going hunting last year, it happened with the bear that my brother shot. I mean, the thing was way off, and I go, hey, let me just try to predator call it.
Right.
And I squealed really hard, and it ran in circles for about 3-4 seconds after I was predator calling, and it stopped, and it just kept eating blueberries. So it's an interesting observation. And bring a predator call with you. Just throw it around your neck. You never know when you're going to need one. I usually never leave the house if I'm going to go hunting without a predator call around my neck. So, and I would highly recommend keep trying it. Don't get discouraged. Like, my success ratio from call sets to when I see bears has risen recently, but I would say it's probably 1 in 15, 1 in 10.
Okay.
So it can take a while. It just depends on the time of year and the amount of bears. Like you're heading up to Alaska here real soon. The bear on the cover of the book, Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting, was a bear that I ended up shooting in Alaska. But I was up there for basically a day and a half of hunting, and I called in 11 bear. And I called in 3 at one time. And that bear on the cover was one of 3 that was running in. And I'm not saying like a mom and 2 cubs. I'm talking 3 full-grown bears charging down a hill at you. So definitely bring a predator call when you go to Alaska, depending on what you're hunting. But
yeah, we're hunting caribou, and I've never had an encounter with a grizzly, but we've been told that we will see them up there. So that's going to be kind of fun and exciting.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Do you think bears can get call shy to predator calls if they've been pressured?
I think they can, especially if it's a common call. So if I go out there and I squeal on a jackrabbit call for forever, and then a bear comes in, sees me, but I don't see it, and it scampers off, I think that educates it. But that's why I kind of push for unconventional calling. For example, taking your coyote howler and whimpering like a dog. I've had bears just come barreling in at me, sounding like a hurt pup, and it's probably because it's not something they've heard before. In Alaska, a similar situation happened where I was predator calling and the bear had no interest in it. So I moved to like a jackrabbit call. And there's, nearest jackrabbits 2,500 miles south of where I was. And the thing just come barreling in, probably because it just hadn't heard that sound before. So the point is not to sound perfect, it's to pique their interest. I really want your listeners to get that point. There's no right way or wrong way to kind of call, as long as you're doing it fairly consistent. Now, I'm not saying you got to blow for an hour straight and never take a breath, but you want to blow for, a good while, and then pause for 30 seconds and listen, and pay attention. You got to give yourself, a chance to hear something coming in. And pay attention to those squirrels. Like, squirrels are great warning alarms, and they'll bark at a bear. I don't know how many times this has happened. The thing will bark a good 500-600 yards off, a squirrel, and then you can hear closer and closer squirrels barking as something's coming in, and sometimes it's a bear, sometimes it's a bobcat, sometimes it's a coyote, but, pay attention to what nature's trying to tell you.
Yeah, that's a great tip. What else? Let's put it this way. Where do you see beginners go wrong, or any advice specifically for beginners and guys that are new to bear hunting?
Biggest advice is find food that the bears are eating for that time of year in your region, with minimal human interaction, and you're going to find bears. That would be like the number one thing to remember in your head. Biggest mistake I see with people who are beginning in predator calling is that they give up too soon. Bears aren't like coyotes. They're not going to come in. Usually they don't come in within 15, 30 minutes. Sometimes it takes a little longer. Not every time. I've called bears in under 5 minutes. But you have to have a lot more patience with bear. So don't give up. And just because something didn't come in doesn't mean something didn't come in. You just didn't see it. And the other thing, too, is boots on the ground, getting out there and physically hiking, whether it be in the backcountry or your local logging road or, apple orchard, whatever it might be. There's no way to, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no better way to get out there than to experience it yourself. You can watch all the YouTube videos you want or read books, but there's something about getting out in the woods and physically doing it yourself that you're going to learn from and that you will come to appreciate. So just get out there and put forth the effort. The other thing, too, another mistake beginning bear hunters make, and I've made myself, is poor shots on bears. And bears are as tough as nails. So if you do a poor shot on a bear, you really need to put the effort in to recover that bear. Or, more importantly, you need to understand the anatomy of a bear before you take that shot. So you want to wait till a bear is broadside, and then that shoulder that's closest to you, wait till it moves forward just a bit, and that opens up its vitals better. The shoulder blade moves out of the way, and you can hit the heart and the lungs a little bit easier. A bear's fur is fluffy most of the time. It's not like a deer where it's close to the body, lays down smooth. You can see a deer's outline really easy. Bears, especially in the fall, they're heavier and they're fluffy, so that's kind of misleading. So really look online, read the book, whatever you need to do to figure out the bear's anatomy so you can make a decent kill shot.
Yeah. What is the kind of one or two quick takeaways in terms of getting guys to shift their mindset? If there's someone who's hunted deer or elk a lot, what's the kind of main things they need to remember when they're evaluating a shot opportunity beyond what you just mentioned? I mean, should it be aiming closer to the shoulder, further, higher? What's something to keep in mind?
Armpit is kind of what I tell people. You want to aim for kind of their armpit. It's a little bit low, and it's a little bit more forward. Now, some people will always say, hey, break the shoulder because you break down the bear. And that, is an option that I also agree with. But it's usually like the armpit is what I kind of tell people. It's a little bit forward, a little bit lower than a deer.
So speaking of differences, we've made the good shot. We hit the armpit. I really want to hear about caring for the bear after recovery, from two perspectives. One being the meat, and the second being the cape, or preparing a bear for a mount or a rug or what have you. But in the field, again, going back to someone who's maybe used to hunting deer or elk, how do they need to approach taking care of a bear after the shot?
Well, the first thing would be, you can go online, and there are some really good videos on how to break down a bear in the field, how to skin them out, and stuff like that. So take the time before you go out there hunting to educate yourself on to give you some knowledge on how to actually do it. But once you get a bear down, you want to cool it off as quickly as possible, like any other animal. So you want to either gut it or do the gutless method, but you want to cool it down. And I'm not saying dip it in a creek. You want to just skin it out, hang the skin somewhere, and you want to keep it cool and dry. Same with the meat. The meat you want to keep cool, dry, and clean. So if you can gut the bear and then skin it, lay out the hide. Don't leave the hide or the meat in the back of your truck under a tarp, showing off your friends, in the middle of a August or September day. The thing will spoil. Bear fat spoils seemingly quick, in my opinion. So really just get that stuff cooled off and get to a butcher or start to process it yourself if you're going to do that. If it's your first bear, the one thing you want to remember is you're not going to want to eat the bear fat. Bear fat's layered. It's not marbled like a bull cow. So there's a nice layer of fat, and you want to just skim that off and get rid of it. Some people will render it down and use it for boot grease or make candles or whatever it may be. I'm sure there's a million uses for it. But, yeah, just get rid of it off the meat, basically. If you want to save it for whatever, go ahead. And then you can start to debone it and get it cool, whether it be in coolers or hanging. And if you have a good quality game sack, one that breathes, you want to use that. Or a cheap man's version is just a cotton pillowcase. And those are washable, fairly cheap. Now, a bear's hide is going to dull your knife a lot faster than a deer or an elk. It just seems to kind of chew up knives. So you want to have kind of a sharpener with you, or razor sharp knives work very well. Like I've used Havalon knives, I don't know how many times for bear recently. Those seem to work really well. But yeah, definitely have a sharpener with you. And take the time to sharpen the knife. You're going to be more likely to cut yourself if you're working with a dull edge than you are struggling with it than you are with a nice sharp knife and making clean cuts. The other thing I would suggest is, bear hair is long and it's, dirty or contaminated with contaminants. If you get hair on the meat, don't take a blowtorch and singe it off. I've seen that trick used on deer and elk. And originally I thought that was a great idea. I was like, man, that's quick. It just melted the hair away. But what that does is it adds heat and then adds the contaminant to the meat. So if you just take some steel wool or have a little bit in your pack, you can just brush that down, and that works really well. It catches that hair and keeps it clean. So, yeah, there's that. Now, if you're going to do a rug or a half mount with a bear, again, I would suggest that you look online to really watch a video on how to do it, or I explain it in my book too. There's pictures of it step by step as well. But basically, you want to go from the very bottom, so from the anus around the testicles or whatever, and then straight up to, you don't have to go all the way to the bottom of the jaw, just to the center of the chest. And then you make, so that's one cut, and then you make 4 other cuts along each leg, from about the bottom of the paw, center of the paw, all the way back to that center cut that you originally made. And you just repeat that on the other 3 legs. And then you can start to skin that out. And that's a good one for a rug. But if you're going to do a half mount, you want to make sure that you leave enough hide on there to be able to wrap the mount. So I always suggest going way back, at least 3-4 ribs back. You want to give the taxidermist plenty of hide. And so it's basically the same thing like a rug mount, but just a little bit less. You don't have to retain the back feet and whatnot if you don't want to, but I usually do. I always take the whole hide.
What are your favorite ways to prepare bear meat? What are some of your just general recipes or certain techniques that you use?
A lot of my bear meat I actually have made into summer sausage. I also like breakfast sausage for bear meat. Bear and pigs are related. If I buy breakfast sausage at the store, that seems to hurt my stomach, but bear meat doesn't really hurt my stomach in the breakfast sausage type of fashion. The other way I like bear meat as well is just thinly sliced, make it into fajitas. And so I usually just slice a backstrap real thin, throw in some salsa as I'm cooking it with some onions and some peppers. And then I just brown it lightly and make sure it's cooked. I mean, you don't want to eat raw bear meat in any way, shape, or form. But, just sear it for a little bit, throw it in a tortilla shell, and go to town.
Out of curiosity, why don't you want to eat the bear meat like medium, or you said raw?
I'm always paranoid about trichinosis.
Okay.
Trichinosis is, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but a parasite that lives in bears. It used to live in domestic pigs too, but most of that's been taken care of. But it can attack, if it's ingested, it can attack humans' muscles, make them very thin. It's a nasty ailment that you want to avoid. So you want to make sure that you cook bear meat like a pork chop. So you don't want to eat a pork chop with any sort of pink in it. Same thing goes for bear.
Huh, I didn't know that.
So it's not your standard red meat.
No, it's not. It's not your standard red meat. You definitely want it cooked.
Okay.
Yeah, we were talking with the previous guest, Rourke Denver, who was a Navy SEAL that hunted with Steven Rinella when they, I believe, got trichinosis up in Alaska. And Rourke was saying that he was the only one on that trip that ate that bear meat that didn't get quite sick. And he was joking is because of all the crappy things he did as a SEAL in previous experiences and all the things his body had seen. But yeah, he was saying how nasty the effects of that infection was from that bear meat for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something you want to chance. Yeah, definitely not. And yeah, you're right. I mean, Navy SEAL, he was probably tough as nails anyway. He could probably eat a half pound of trichinosis and come out looking like daisies. But
just need something to wash it down with, that's all.
That's right. And knowing them, it'd be beer or whiskey.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the bear hunting opportunities that are out there. You're based in Washington, have mentioned Alaska, but really there's quite a few areas throughout the country. Are there any in particular that stand out to you that guys should consider specifically, maybe if they're want to hunt a non-resident state?
The best time I've had is heading up to Alaska. That was a couple years back before they doubled the fees for non-residents. But, it's something you can do fairly cheap. Black bear does not have to be guided. So if you can find a bush pilot or somebody to go in there and drop you off, and you are comfortable with that, you can see Alaska, which is an amazing state, and have plenty of shot opportunities at black bear, either spot and stock or calling. I know that they can bait up there, but you'd have to check the regs on that as far as, the specifics. But Alaska, I would recommend going to Alaska for black bear for anybody. It was an amazing experience.
Any specific areas of Alaska that you'd kind of consider? Obviously not looking for a specific spot, but just in general. I mean, Alaska's a big place. Are the black bear populations focused in any certain region of Alaska?
What I would suggest is, like a lot of states, Alaska posts the harvest, the previous harvest year's success rates for resident and non-resident tags. So you can kind of gauge, hey, I'm a non-resident, I've never been there before, but, they had 25% success rate compared to, a little different spot that might have been 10% success. Where I hunted, when I went up there, I think it was like 10% non-resident success, and, there was bears everywhere. So I don't know what the other resident or non-residents were doing, but, there was plenty of opportunity. As far as now, if you can't afford to go to Alaska, say you live in North Carolina or something like that. My other suggestion would be if you're tired of baiting, is to give spot and stock or calling a try, and that might change how you perceive bear hunting. If you're tired of sitting there baiting and you want to try something different, try it in your own state, and then you get to see a lot more country, and it changes the dynamic, and vice versa. If you're a spot and stalker and you want to do a bait set in Idaho and you live in Washington, by all means give it a shot. That you learn by doing different things, and the chance to observe bear that close and stuff like that. People shouldn't pass on it.
Yeah. Let's wrap up with this. What is your most memorable black bear hunting encounter?
Well, I've got a lot of them, but the most memorable would probably be that triple call-in that I had up in Alaska. So the story's in my book, but I'll give you kind of the verbal version of it here. I ended up going up there with a buddy of mine who I grew up with, but he kind of came along as a photographer, and we had been hunting most of the day, and we'd seen some bears, but things just didn't pan out. We headed back to camp, and he says, "Oh man, there's a bear, up on this rock formation." And so I grabbed my predator call, and we scurried up on this rock, and he gets behind me, and he's got the camera going, and I start predator calling, and here comes the bear, just come barreling down the hill at about 400 yards, I think. And let me break it down for you here real quick. We're on a rocky outcropping, but we're out looking this huge mountain, and on the mountain is about 10, 12 foot high brush, but there's pockets of openings, and so there's no way I'm going to go in there tromping after a bear. My only hope is to call him down to me where it's a little more open than the valley floor. And so that bear comes running down, and then as I'm predator calling, another bear come out of the opening and starts barreling down. So now I got two bears coming down. And as I say, "Hey, Justin, did you see that other bear? There's two of them." As I turn my head to the right, because he was kind of right behind me, there's another bear that's under 100 yards just barreling through this creek at me. So the sun hit the bear right, water splashing up. There's a coyote, fox. Was that fox? I can't remember. There was like a dog, a coyote, running out of the area as the bear's running across this creek. So now I'm just like, I can't believe what's going on. I've got three bears running in. The one that crossed the creek kind of traipses along and ends up slowing up a little bit, starts to think about the situation, and then cuts to my left and tries to wind me. But the wind was going the right way, and we were up a little bit, so it didn't quite smell us, and it ended up working its way, under 30 yards, I would say.
Wow.
And then I can hear the camera going off in the background, and I said, "Justin, did you get photos?" "Yeah." So I took the only shot I had, which was a frontal shot, center of the head, but it was well under 30 yards, and it just piled up right there. And with the other two bears coming down, so it was a heck of a trip.
Yeah. That certainly sounds like it.
But that's one. I've been within like 3 steps of bears. Opening day in August 1st, I took my son out, and we heard a bear before I ever saw it. We hopped up over this embankment, and I'm huffing and popping my jaw like a bear does to just try to get it to stand up or tree or to take a look and stick around. And I thought it was like 40 yards up the hill, and it turns out it was about 15 yards to my left, and it just kind of barreled out under this log and ran in front of us. And so that was kind of fun too. The boy loved it. That was the first time he got to see a bear out in the wild with a tag in his pocket.
Wow.
But
was gonna say he'd either love that or he'd be terrified by it.
Oh, he loved it. He was ready to start throwing lead, but I said, the bear's running. Let's hold off a second.
How old is he? Your son?
He's 13.
I've got a quick question for you on hibernation and how that process works in the fall and also in the spring as they start leaving their den. I don't fully grasp, like, do they get a den and kind of like feed in and out of it for a month, or do they just like feed and then find their den and then they're in there and then they wake up one day and then they just start hiking 10 miles away? I mean, how does that work?
I think it varies through region.
Okay.
Warmer regions, they hibernate a lot less. It's more of some people say even in Washington and warmer parts they don't necessarily hibernate the whole way, but to my understanding, they'll find a den. They might even use the same den for a couple of years, and a den can be an old stump, it can be an old crevice in a tree, or I don't know if you've ever shot a bear and been looking for it, but those things can ball up and they hide in the most nastiest spots, and they're like a tick. They just barrel into something, or it can be a cave, whatever it might be. So anyway, they feed in the fall, and then they basically just slip into their hibernation state, and they stay in there until spring comes around, and then I think they start to venture out a little bit. They might go back to the den on occasion if the weather's still nasty.
Okay.
They might have had a little early rise, but most of the time it's kind of off and running. They start eating that green grass.
Okay. Yeah, I've always wondered, like in the spring, if we spot them, does that mean the den's within 100 yards and they're just kind of hanging out in that area feeding and not really moving, or I've just never fully understood how that process works.
Most of the time, the way I see with bears is that they'll hang out in a spot. If there's food and they don't feel threatened or anything, they'll stay in that spot until the food's kind of gone or they've found something better. So last year goat hunting, I was looking at a couple of blueberry patches, and one blueberry patch would have a bear in it, and then you'd look in the next one and the next one and the next one, and they all just kind of hung out there day after day with minimal movement. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to put a stock on them. There's no reason for them to go anywhere to burn those calories. Their whole idea is to gain calories, not burn them. So if they can sit there and eat, why not?
Doug, before we get away from here, where can listeners check out your books? Where can they follow you online, or anything else you'd like to have them check out?
They can get the book anywhere online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. The Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting is the one that I would recommend. Not to say that my first book isn't good or anything like that, but the second book has all that information of the first book and more. I still make money on the first book, so if they want to buy them both, go ahead, but I'm just saying. And you can get the ebook version too. That's available Amazon, any online retailer. As far as brick and mortar stores that carry it, Barnes and Noble carries it. But you need to kind of call around to make sure that they have it. Cabela's in Tulalip, Washington will be carrying it here real soon. I'm doing a bear seminar this weekend, and I'll be doing a book signing there. If people want to follow me, they can go on Instagram at Bows and Bears, BOZEANDBEARS. You'll find my small site there. And bowsandbears@hotmail.com. If you guys have any questions, just send me an email. It's not a big deal. I'm happy to talk to anybody or to offer advice. I'm always happy to talk to fellow hunters, and whether they support me or not through the book. It's just good to meet people and to help them out if they need it. So
awesome. Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to dive deeper into these topics, be sure to go check out Doug's books. They're available on Amazon and many other places where you can find books. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for us about the show, we would love to hear it. Shoot us an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Hope to catch you guys next week for another great episode.